It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello, and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show with by far the bravest call screeners. I'm Christy Powell. My newest official co-host tonight is someone who knows a thing or two about recovering from religious trauma. Welcome, Nate Smith.
Official co-host?
Yeah, we decided to make that official while the music was running. Congratulations.
Wow, this is just proof, folks, that if you send Christy enough offensive memes on Facebook, he will crack and make you a co-host on his show. Just say it.
That's the strategy. That works for everybody. Call the show, send in memes, join the Facebook group. There are a lot of great ways to interact. But in the meantime, our guest tonight is a counselor and religious recovery consultant here to speak about the upcoming conference on religious trauma. Welcome, Janice Selby.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me on your amazing program. I'm happy to be here.
So glad to have you.
Thanks, Janice. So tonight we're going to be divorcing religion and kicking it to a studio apartment to eat cold chili straight from the can. So give us a call. The number is 512-991-9242, or you can also reach us at nearly the speed of light at tiny.cc/callsex, because the show is starting right now, folks. Let's talk.
All right. Janice, I would love to just hear a little bit more about what it is you do. You know, I myself was recently interviewed as a therapist specializing in religious trauma. And honestly, I found myself kind of struggling to explain what that work actually looks like. So I'd love to start by just hearing how you define religious trauma.
Sure. I feel like there's a couple of different aspects to it. So, someone can be traumatized by another person's behavior under the guise of religion. So we tend to think of that horrible thing when we think of priests molesting children, right? But religious trauma syndrome is different, because that is really more of a collection of symptoms that we experience when we're part of a fundamentalist group, and then that we experience when we leave that fundamentalist group, because there are losses in both scenarios, and it really is a double whammy when you leave, because then you're also losing your community, losing your identity. I lost my marriage, as a number of people do. So that's kind of how I break down religious trauma versus religious trauma syndrome.
Sure. Well, then how does religious trauma syndrome fit the bill for complex PTSD from like a more therapist perspective?
Right. So complex PTSD is generally when it has been ongoing for a long time. It's not a one-time incident. So I was raised in a fundamentalist household. So from the time I was born and, all through my growing up, it was hammered into me that the Bible was the true, literal, inerrant word of God, and that everything in that Bible was still true for today. So that they're, growing up as a child, believing in a literal hell, believing that an innocent man had to be tortured to death because I was so vile, because I, at 5 years old, was such a terrible, terrible human. So when you're going week after week to church and hearing this, and then of course you're probably going to youth group, you're probably in choir, you're probably doing a Bible study. So it really, you're subjected to the content over and over and over again. And not to mention, your own identity doesn't really have the opportunity to develop apart from that. You are told how to be and what to think and how to behave. So it's pretty upsetting.
Yeah. Well, what is it then that makes religious trauma maybe unique in terms of trauma or complex trauma, and maybe especially insidious in some of these ways?
I think largely because Well, first of all, it's typically not recognized by therapists, or not even recognized by society at large. So we have a lot of grief when we divorce religion, or when we, when we're leaving that fundamentalist group. There's grief over our losses, but that grief isn't recognized the same way as, if you lose a spouse, or even if your dog dies, a beloved pet dies, people tend to have some sympathy for that and cut you some slack when you're struggling, but not so with religious trauma. I mean, when my entire worldview and my own identity dissolved around me into nothingness, I mean, talk about an existential crisis, but you don't get a day off work for it. You just got to keep going. How are you? I don't even know how I am. I don't even know who I am. So
I just found out I'm going to die and not go to heaven forever. So thanks for bringing that up.
That's exactly, I mean, and unless people have lived through it, they really have a very hard time relating to it. And what you hear frequently is, oh, so you stopped believing in Santa Claus, which I'm going to tell you is super offensive. That is so offensive to say to somebody when their entire worldview has come crashing down to the ground. So it's insidious in that way. And also because in North America, religion is pervasive. Like I'm in Canada. I think we don't have it quite as bad here as you guys do in the States, but it's still everywhere. People still kind of use it as a yardstick for measuring things.
You guys don't pledge allegiance to God every single day and put him on your money and all of that? That's not required by God? Okay. All right.
No, we have a queen that's equally as irrelevant, Christy.
Okay. Fair.
And on all our money. Yes.
Yes.
Well,
that was a good point, though. What you said, Janice, that what makes religious trauma especially insidious is that the people that we normally might lean on for help and for support during something like the loss of a spouse or a pet, those are quite often the people that leave us and hang us out to dry when we leave religion.
It's so true. It's so true. Yeah, and to lose your community and then often be shunned by them. And I mean, I think of these women who've grown up in really fundamentalist situations. They have like 6 and 7 kids, right? And they're only in their 20s or something, these women. And when they leave, they really leave, and they don't have the skills needed to get by in the world, to be able to provide for their children. And then, of course, also the religious communities, often I'm thinking of the Orthodox Jewish communities, they band together and they will, have the money to take the mother to court and try and keep the children and not allow her to put them in public school. So the losses are so great. It's exhausting when you divorce religion.
Yeah. No, I hear that. And I'm sure that a lot of these experiences are very familiar to a ton of the people watching right now. But when it comes to being in the therapist office, what are some of the symptoms or maybe the impact of religious trauma?
Well, you touched on it before when you were asking about how, pardon me, how is it like complex PTSD, or how does it, what's the crossover there? So a lot of people who have religious trauma syndrome, they do have nightmares and flashbacks, and there's the hyper arousal, or for some people, they can just feel numb, like that they're not feeling anything. Inaccurate beliefs and self-hatred can be very strong and very hard to overcome as you are trying to push back against these horrible stories that you've been told from childhood for a lot of us, that if if you blaspheme the Holy Spirit, you're going to hell, or whatever the things are that we are having to deal with. And physically, poor sleep, gastrointestinal issues, weight gain and weight loss, tension headaches and migraines. And even when we think of the grief portion, there's anger, there's sadness and confusion. And that can even also show up as clumsiness. When we're grieving, we can be clumsy because we're in a fog. So we're not really, we're not capable of paying as close attention sometimes as we ought to be. So those things can all happen when we have religious trauma syndrome.
Yeah. Well, I know that the loss of community, the loss of family, the pervasiveness of religion in the culture, like all of those things really contribute to this. But I'm curious if you have a read on why religion itself can be so traumatizing for so many people, or maybe what types of like specific beliefs or teachings cause that kind of damage.
For sure, the notion of us versus them, in and
Yeah,
out
sure.
groups. And when we just look through history, we see so many wars that have actually been fought over this very thing. Think of the Crusades, and think of times when the Muslims through history have tried to take over. So people really believing that they are righteous and they have righteous indignation and righteous anger, and God is on their side and the infidels must pay. So that kind of thinking, certainly very damaging. And of course, as I mentioned, the whole concept of indoctrinating children to believe in hell is just, that sticks with people. And the younger we are, when a trustworthy person like our parents or a teacher tells us something scary, right? So we're taking it in, and we're taking it in with fear also, and it's come from a trusted source, and that goes into our brain, and it's like surrounded with barbed wire and psychological booby traps that make it hard even for us to be able to question it. Like the cognitive dissonance is just massive. It really takes a tremendous amount of courage to be willing to examine those core beliefs that we've had for many, many years.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned that growing up for you, you were taught that the Bible is literally true and still relevant. And I know that I have seen that in my own life and in the people that I work with, that idea of like the inerrancy of the scripture. If we're talking specifically about like evangelical Christianity, this idea that this ancient book of poetry somehow overrides our natural instincts and our natural desires for, for justice and compassion and these different things, when there's this ancient book that encourages people to kick out a family member and completely disfellowship them from their community and these different things. That idea that we can like literally deify these ideals over what our instincts, what our intuition is showing us.
Right. So so people end up choosing religion over relationship, or they're choosing their ideology because it has become so enmeshed with their identity. It's virtually impossible for them to distinguish between the two, and which is also why deeply religious people can get so offended if you question their beliefs, because they will take it as a personal affront, because it's not just their belief, it's their identity. And I mean, one other teaching that is just really so brutal is this whole concept of obedience. You must obey the first time, every time. So religion would really seek to squash curiosity or autonomy, and instead, your parents just end up insisting, or your teachers end up insisting, you must fit this paradigm. You must be a round peg in a round hole. That's all there is to it. And you can be punished for questioning. And it's seen as, instead of us seeing it as curiosity, it's instead viewed as disobedience. And that just takes such a huge toll. And it prevents us from being authentic. We don't even know who we are when we leave religion. We really don't, because we only know who we are in the context of the religious story that we've been told.
that version of ourselves, that box that we've been trying to fit ourselves into, even though, again, we are overriding our own intuition, like our own relationship with our body, our own belief systems. Each person, I don't mean for this to sound too wooey, but we all have a natural gut reaction as we co-regulate with one another, and as we just witness things that offend us or upset us. That's not to say that like our internal body's conscience or whatever is magic, but it's worth listening to. And when religion tells us to override that or to ignore that, we really violate that relationship.
It's so true. And, I look at my mother, who's quite elderly. And so my dad was like super uptight, fundy, very rigid, authoritarian. And my mom never was. She's always been more about the love and, just kind of more relaxed in her faith. And so when she finds out the work I'm doing and she says, oh, well, but my faith has only ever been wonderful for me. And I'm going, really? Because you stayed married to an abusive son of a bitch for almost 50 years. And me and my siblings, we had to be part of that. We had to grow up in that house and witness that. So you're saying that your faith only helped you, but the teaching that God hates divorce, that definitely harmed you. The teaching that you must always turn the other cheek, bullshit.
That is so true. And that really resonates with me because my mother went from my abusive father to another abusive husband. And she likes to say the same thing. Well, my faith helped me through those times. No, your faith made it worse. Your faith made it worse for everybody in your life. Like there's a reason why I left when I was 14. And, like you were saying earlier with the demand for obedience, right? Like, it's amazing how quickly you go from being everybody's favorite devout little Christian and to having some doubts after reading the book and asking honest questions and being completely vilified and ostracized for that. And then, especially as a child, it's like, well, you wanted me to read this book, and I read this book, and it's fucking crazy, man. Like, what is going on here? Like, are you telling me you would take me up a mountain and stab me in the heart if a voice in your head told you to? Like, that's terrifying.
Please don't.
Yeah, please maybe don't. We are still looking for some calls here, folks. So you can come in on the internet at tiny.cc/callsex or 512-991-9242. Give us a call. We want to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
Christy?
One story. Shall I go?
Go ahead.
So I was raised in fundamentalism and didn't start questioning till my late 30s. Didn't leave until around 40. And I had been married to a man who was a pastor, and I homeschooled my kids and was very, very conservative. So no makeup, no jewelry. My hair was always covered, that sort of thing. And but then I started feeling uncomfortable because I felt like his voice was always going to be worth more in that marriage, just by virtue of the fact that he has a penis. And I did have a problem with that. And then there was a series of tragedies that happened. And then with the last one being our youngest daughter was afflicted with a life-threatening illness. And at that point, I was just like, I have bet on the wrong horse. This can't be right. I mean, I've tried to live a life closer to the Bible and closer to God than anybody else I know. And I'm just getting this shitstorm raining down over me. And that was the tragedy that started to shake me free from my cognitive dissonance so I could actually give myself permission to start looking elsewhere and start looking at other religions. And then I did a deep dive into the whole New Age camp, and I parked there for a few years until I realized that I didn't even need that. I was just fine on my own. Didn't need anybody telling me how to do my life except me.
That's awesome. I heard you on one of the Recovering from Religion segments that you did for us. I heard you say something really profound. You said that doubt is the first step towards knowledge. Do you remember that? And that's kind of what you're saying here, is that those questions are kind of the first things that are going to lead you towards a path that is actually reality, more in line with what's true.
Well, and something that's worth maybe pointing out here, Janice, I don't know what your experience was, but myself, like I heard you talking about how you tried harder than perhaps anybody around you to connect with God. And that was very much my story. Like I was as devout as I possibly knew how to be. I was really committed. And it wasn't until I started working with the atheist community or the ex-evangelical community and these different things that I realized just how many people were experiencing religious trauma without themselves ever having been particularly devout or really committed to these ideas. I led a process group as we were working through some of these issues, and was really shocked to find out that 6 out of 6 people that were in the group had themselves never really truly believed, but it had to kind of pay lip service or go through the motions because of their families, because of their culture, because of maybe even a sense of desperation and a desire to like override that doubt. So we're not just talking here about people that, you know, were dyed in the wool true believers. I mean, that getting away from Santa Claus is a part of it, but there's more to it than that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And whether you were forced into an inauthentic belief system because of, say, a covenant or a vow that you made at 6 years old, because you, at 6 years old, want to please your parents. Your parents keep you alive. So you have a vested interest in wanting to please them. And so when they say, you know, you really need to accept Jesus in your heart, or whether you were a teenager at church camp and there is an emotionally manipulative youth pastor and your peers who are very susceptible to emotional hype and everything too, and they have that altar call at that last night of the church camp, and you're, you know, everyone's saying, go up, you just got to give your life to Jesus. And so you are under duress, psychological duress, emotional duress, and you don't even have the ability necessarily at that point to think critically about the Bible, about these things that you are being told, and yet you go through with that. You're forced to go through the motions. And I want your listeners to know that it is completely fine, and there's no shame in breaking that contract, that vow, that covenant that you made at some point. I talk about it in terms of a separation agreement, because you are divorcing religion and you don't have to live by those rules anymore.
Yeah, I've said this on the show before, but it wasn't until I started to study hypnosis and learn a little bit about like interpersonal neurobiology and these different aspects of how our brains and how our bodies work and how we co-regulate and how that can be impacted by music and by, you know, standing with your hand up in a very hot room for hours on end. Like
Yes.
that's a pretty manipulative tactic. And it is going to generate an emotional reaction and a quote unquote spiritual experience that really hooked me into all of this.
Yeah, like a form of mystical manipulation. And so we can see also with chanting or speaking in tongues, or you look at the whirling dervishes in Turkey, they can get themselves into an altered state of consciousness by doing those very actions, those things that you're talking about. And so you're in there. And then if you also have this expectation that something supernatural is going to happen, then that is exactly how you're going to interpret anything that does happen, that just happens to be a physiological response to whatever kind of manipulation is going on.
Sure. Well, I wanted to ask as well how religious trauma or religious trauma syndrome, as it gets more complicated, how it specifically impacts our gender and our sexuality. I know we talk about purity culture on this show a lot, but there's a lot here, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, my experience was growing up as a female in a fundamentalist environment. So my gender role was prescribed for me. I was to grow up, get married, and start having babies. So I didn't even, I dropped out of college when I met my husband. I was so relieved that someone wanted to marry me and that I could begin my real work of populating the kingdom,
Yeah, fill that quiver.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I was a fundie when we married, but I didn't get really hardcore fundie until we moved to a Bible college campus that happened to be quite conservative. And then while we were there, I started seeing these women in the grocery store in the town, and they always had their head coverings on, and they were very modestly dressed, always in long skirts and dresses. And then when I found out that was actually, because the Bible says that, that's how women are to adorn themselves.
Naturally.
And then I thought, well, why aren't we being obedient? I want to be as obedient as I can be. And so that's when I started wearing my head covering. I took off my wedding ring, like I wasn't wearing any jewelry, anything like that, and really took a deep dive into that fundie hole. And that is especially where you see these massive differences between what is permissible for men and what's permissible for women. So that's kind of how I see the gender thing, at least the roles playing out there. And of course, as far as sexuality, I mean, just so much of the suppression and repression, like we talk about with purity culture. It's so damaging. I mean, a lot of people, when they are finally able to question religion, actually wonder if am I even straight? Maybe I'm not even really straight. Maybe I was just acting like a straight person because that's
been
the
there.
way I was.
Yeah, been there.
Yeah.
Yes, I can relate as well because I'm bisexual, but I wasn't able to explore that obviously when I was married to my pastor husband. And so that was an important piece of my puzzle, finally moving into a space where I could start to experiment and figure out what felt right for me and what felt good for me and have no shame about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes it so bad, is that it's a system that literally only works for straight white men. Right? Like it's great if you're in that in group, but if you're anywhere on the LGBT spectrum or a woman, which is, half of the population of humankind, right? Or somebody somewhere on that spectrum, as most of us are, right? There's no person that's absolutely perfectly straight or absolutely perfectly gay, right? Like everybody's on that spectrum somewhere. So this is really a system meant to only benefit the straightest of whitest of cisest of heterosist men. It's awful. Blows my mind.
Mm-hmm.
You put it very well. That's exactly right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, the calls are starting to roll in. I want to give Nate a chance to jump onto the phones, but before we do, I wanted to just quickly ask, what kinds of treatments or techniques or strategies have you found helpful when we're talking not just about, trying to be happier, healthier, less anxious, less depressed kind of people, but are specifically dealing with this type of trauma?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, of course, as you would know, part of it depends on the client and what their temperament is and what their background is. So I do not use EMDR in my practice, but a lot of people do find EMDR very helpful. I do a ton of grief work because many of my clients, maybe they haven't given themselves permission to actually acknowledge it. But if we can't mourn what we don't acknowledge. And so I will have them make a list of the costs that were associated with following religion and then with leaving religion. And it can be a pretty extensive list. And we go through those things and they have a chance to actually talk about them and mourn those losses. I find that actually is a really big deal and helpful deal. I do use CBT, of course. And then an amount of group work can be really therapeutic as well. So I see clients one-on-one, but I also run the Divorcing Religion workshop, which is group work. And I do it online. It takes 6 weeks. We meet every Sunday, and we go through the 6 modules of that workshop. And people come from all different backgrounds, but what they find is their grief and their sadness and their losses are quite similar. They can relate to each other, and more than that, they're able to support one another as they're moving into trying to build a healthy secular life for themselves.
Yeah, I lead a process group for religious trauma. And one of the things that we talked about early on was the fact that, you know, we're in a small group of people. There are 6 or 7 of us. We're all coming together. I gave everybody a chance to kind of share their deconversion story. And, you know, we acknowledged the fact that we were meeting on a Sunday night and, you know, really talked about how we were sort of like modeling or using some of those same religious tools that impacted us, because religion is a cultural thing. It is a group trauma, and so healing in a group setting makes a lot of sense and is a big part of the process. I also just want to very quickly mention, you brought up EMDR, which is a very specific therapy that I personally also don't use in my practice, but was very useful for me. And I might encourage people to investigate it. It's a very protocol-based, very specific type of therapy that you can just easily Google. It's a strategy for, I guess, in a lot of ways, like bypassing sort of your conscious mind is a way of getting closer to some of those like uncomfortable memories and some of those traumatic experiences without immediately triggering our body's like natural reactions to those memories. And something that I think a lot of people will find really helpful.
Yeah, look it up.
Yeah, for sure. I would encourage everybody who is curious, or really everybody who is listening to this. I'm imagining if you have found this channel, that some of this is either something that you have already gone through and are going through, or something that you're just now beginning to heal from. And I guess I just want to say over and over again that the mission of the ACA, the positive atheism that we espouse, it's not just about dunking on theists on AXP. It's not, you know, just about fighting the religion in the news and helping to like unplug people from religion. It's about reminding people that there are opportunities for healing from some of these things. And, you know, there are a lot of great therapists that are doing this kind of work and a lot of different ways and strategies for finding that healing. But in the meantime, Nate, we got a bunch of phone calls. Who do you want to start with?
We do. We've got some great calls. Kind of what we were talking about a moment ago. We have Laura on the line from, I think that's California. Now, she has left fundamentalist Christianity this year and is wondering how to sort of move away from that notion of the one man, one woman, and sort of grow beyond that. Laura, welcome to the show. You are live.
Thank you so much for taking my call. Nice to talk to all of you.
Welcome. Tell us some more about your journey.
So as you stated, I kind of undid my fundamentalist Christianity this year, and I'm in my early 30s and still single. And so now I find myself having to just reanalyze everything about the way I think about relationships, the way I have conceptualized dating. You know, I used to think of dating for a purpose, and the only reason that you date is because you're looking for your husband, and what kind of criteria you need to set for, you know, said husband. And now that I, you know, have eschewed a lot of the biblical values, it's sort of, I feel overwhelmed and trying to figure out, like, oh, am I poly or do I want monogamy? What does monogamy even mean? Does that mean being with one person, but maybe just having an open relationship? And I, you know, there are some things that are more solid for me, like my sexuality. Like, I definitely still feel like straight, and, you know, like, so my pronouns are still she, her, I think. But just knowing what a relationship is supposed to be now that I don't have the biblical cookie cutter sort of, you know, marry and stay together forever. it's kind of just overwhelming and trying to figure that out, trying to figure out how much of my intrinsic ideas about relationships are biblical versus what I actually personally feel.
Yeah, it is overwhelming, right? Like, in a certain way, I kind of want to just direct you towards every episode of this show we've ever done, because, yeah, that's the whole thing.
And I do watch a lot of them.
Well, I certainly appreciate that, but I hear where you're coming from. You know, I met my high school sweetheart as a 15-year-old conservative Christian virgin, and we married 8 years later with those same adjectives still applying, and, you know, found myself in my mid-20s setting up a Tinder account for the first time going, what the hell? What do we do here? And I don't know that there is anything that we could say over the course of this phone call that will make that that scariness go away. But I think the most important advice that I could have received in that moment or at that time was just to remember that you've got your life back. You've got your whole life in front of you. And as much as you might feel eager and excited and maybe even a sense of like desperation and urgency to resolve this, you've got time. Every first date that you go on gets to be its own story, and those stories don't necessarily need to have a happy ending. Sometimes my best stories have a really dumb or silly or ridiculous ending, and I don't regret any of those stories. You don't have to have any of this figured out. I hear what you're saying about being straight, about being a woman, and good for you. That's probably true, and there's no need to really change that or overly test that. But you might find yourself going out on a date with somebody who doesn't look like who you imagined yourself with. You might find yourself going out on a date with a woman. You might find yourself going out on a bunch of really terrible dates and a bunch of really fun ones with people that you have no business with. And all of that is totally fine and okay. You don't owe it to anybody, not even yourself, to have this figured out. You get to just enjoy this journey. What other tips would y'all offer Laura tonight?
I think it sounds already like Laura is doing some research and reading. There's lots of books out there that might be of interest to you if you're looking into, what is monogamy and polyamory and open relationships. And one other thing that, just a practical thing really that I recommend to anyone who's leaving religion, take the time to do some values clarification exercises, and that will help you kind of figure out and determine what is it that's really important to Laura versus what is just, well, my parents or my Sunday school teacher or whatever said that was important, and so that was used to be important to me, but it's not important now. So you can find values clarification exercises all over the internet. And so I recommend doing some of those as you're exploring who you are now that you're unencumbered.
Yeah, and I'll actually mention that I have one that I put together myself based on some things that Irvin Yalom had published, and I'll make sure to have that on my website in the footnotes for this episode. So do yourself a Google, find a bunch of great resources, but that's at least one that I'll make sure to put in front of everybody. Nate, do you have anything to add here?
Of course I do. Yes, Laura, you have come so far that I just want to say you are so brave for having left that and for having challenged yourself to leave and to find the truth. And it is going to be scary, especially when you're in your 30s and don't necessarily have the experience that a secular younger person might have. But kind of like Christy said, it is scary, but man, it is so exciting, that you get to now decide what works for you. Like, you get to make your rules and you can play around, right? Like, if you go on a date with a girl, or if you decide to try a poly relationship and you decide it doesn't work for you, that's okay. You might still identify as a straight person, right? Like, if if you take a trip to Italy and decide that you really like it and then come back home, that doesn't make you an Italian, right? Like, you can shop around and then you can arrive at the identity that works for you and be so much happier for it. So I'm almost a little bit jealous that you get to do this journey again. It is scary, but it is super exciting, and you are very brave for having started. How does that sound to you?
That sounds great. I really appreciate it. Thank you all so much.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate you calling.
Godspeed. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we let you go?
No, I mean, that definitely helps. And I've been reading Dr. Darrell Ray's book, Sex and God, so it's definitely been illuminating a lot of things for me too. Like someone said, I have been trying to do research and stuff like that. So, I mean, I guess that's just the place that I'm in now, is researching and trying to figure it out. So I guess it is definitely helpful just to kind of hear that reminder that I have time, that I don't have to figure it out right now. And I guess that's also kind of where one of the spaces of my discomfort comes from, I guess, probably because I'm used to having it figured out. I'm used to knowing what I do all the time. So this is like the first time in my life where I'm kind of like, okay, I don't really know now. So
I hear that.
Time, and that's important.
Yeah, don't worry about where you end up, because ending up's not real. You know, this life you build, you're going to never stop creating it until you die, and then you won't be here to worry about it anyhow. So this is an ongoing thing, and there's no quota, there's no finish line. Just keep going. I'm so excited for you.
Thanks, Christy. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
I'm excited for you too, Laura, Laura. And just as a reminder, you're reading Dr. Ray's book. He's a great resource for this kind of thing. And he's actually, I don't know if you've ever used Recovering from Religion, but you can call in or chat in or lean on us anytime that you want to. Again, like Christy said, this isn't going to just go away overnight. It's going to be a long process. So you can feel free to lean on us anytime that you like. Okay.
Sure. Thanks, Nate. I appreciate it.
All right. You take care of yourself. And we do have other calls on the line. Did we?
Yeah, I think we can sneak in one more.
Jump in one more. Yeah. All
Totally.
right.
Let's do it.
All right. We have another. Oh goodness. We have another Canadian on the line, continuing our Canadian invasion of the atheist community of Austin.
Right?
Lucky's going through some religious trauma and wanted somebody to talk to about it. So Lucky, tell us what's going on.
Well, first of all, great to be on the show. I'm a huge fan of the ACA community, and this show, the God I've just discovered I don't believe in anymore, brought me here for sure tonight. So what can I say? I could relate to a lot of things that you were saying, Janice, about I was raised in a family that we went to church all the time, and I went to youth groups, and I was even in a group where we were discussing whether or not homosexual ministers could be ordained, and my family left the church when they decided, yes, it was okay for gay people to be going and working in a church. I'm very nervous, and I'm afraid somebody's going to hear me because I know my accent is thick. And I also work for a Catholic organization, and I'd like to get out of it, but it's right now the bread and butter. So
I hear that.
That's hard.
So are you dependent on them for an income?
it's my job, yes.
Yeah, that's got to be tough.
I hear that, especially this year.
What kind of led you to the place you're at now? Like what were some of the cracks that started to appear in the armor? Can you tell me about that?
Well, I guess after my dad died in 2017, I started questioning my faith and will I ever see him again and things like that. And one day I thought I was seeing a butterfly, and I said, "Oh, it must be my dad." And one of my friends said, "Are you sure?" And then I didn't realize he was an atheist, and he started telling me about the ACA, and I was really interested. And when I listened, I was hooked, and I listened to it all the time. And I started to listen to other shows, and I started to realize that I was fed a lie, and then I realized that I felt like I was a non-entity because I believed most of my life that everything that happened good in my life was because of God, and anything that happened bad in my life was because I was tempted by Satan.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't exist. So even when people would compliment me, my go-to was, "Oh, it's not me, it's God."
Yeah.
Thanks though.
Glory to God. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, glory to God, exactly. So now I'm like, feel like I'm not suicidal. I'm not that distraught. I still keep my life together, but occasionally I get very angry because I still have thoughts in my head about how hard it is to. I don't have anybody else to talk to. I think everybody believes in that. I can't find a therapist that doesn't think I need to turn to God.
Mm-hmm.
I called the religious recovery from religion, and I also got my therapist would be from Minnesota. That's the closest one they could send me to.
So you tried the seculartherapy.org, and the closest one we had was in Minnesota?
No, I tried recovery from religion. Sorry, I did not try that other one.
Okay, so recovering from religion is usually just we're kind of peer support. We're a kind ear and a compassionate ear, sort of like me, right? I'm the layperson in between these two experts here that you see. So I benefit from their wisdom. But we do have a sister organization that's called the Secular Therapy Project, and we do have a list of heavily vetted healers that use evidence-based treatments to help you recover from this trauma. So you're not going to get any of that crap about you need to pray or you need to, it's not on you, or it's, God's responsible for the good stuff and Satan for the bad, right? They're not going to give you any of that bullshit. They're going to give you real help and real solutions. So I definitely recommend that you check out that resource. It's seculartherapy.org. I know we do have some therapists in Canada. I see your whereabouts are you from, Lucky?
I'm in Ontario.
Ontario, okay. So I'm fairly certain
much more than that.
We must have somebody there. But even if you just go to our helpline, our chat line, just at recoveringfromreligion.org, and you can just chat in, and an agent will look it up for you and put you in touch.
Yeah, and even if you are if you're open to working online, there are definitely opportunities. The telehealth laws are really silly and ridiculous. Janice, I don't know exactly what it's like up your way in Canada. I know that down here in the States, we have this bizarre patchwork of rules and regulations. But beyond all of that, it's just important that people are getting the care that they need. And so regardless of where you're at, if you have the ability to watch this show, if you have the ability to connect to the internet, you have the ability to get in touch with a great religious trauma coach or counselor or therapist of some stripe or some format. I recognize how difficult it can be to find those people, but they absolutely, absolutely exist. And so even if you need to email me directly, sex@atheist-community.org, if that is something that you're looking for, it's something that you can find.
And also, I am Canadian. I live in British Columbia, and I am a therapist. I work with people who have religious trauma.
Perfect.
I would be willing to do it online for sure. Zoom calls, definitely.
Yeah, so to everybody listening, wherever you are, there is opportunity for healing and for growth for you.
I think
you came to the right place, Lucky.
Thanks. When I heard what your topic was, I thought I came here, this was meant to be. And every time I listen to your show, I get something out of it. So I know that people are listening now will be getting something out of it. And it maybe helps somebody to know that you don't have to any longer feel the shame of that you're born unclean, but you're better than everybody else. They're the two things that I struggled with. I felt ashamed when I would get things, but other people didn't, because I was somehow, I was one of the chosen ones, because I was, anyhow, I feel embarrassed sharing that, but that was part of my life for a long time.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I want to thank you as well. The moment you said it, there was definitely something inside of me that was like, oh, I remember that feeling. And honestly, just bringing it back to awareness and then noticing it and then letting it go is a beautiful therapeutic experience in itself. So thank you for being vulnerable with us tonight.
Thank you, guys. I'm so shy, but I feel much better, and we should let somebody else have a turn.
You are
Lucky.
doing so great, and you have actually found a community that you can sort of lean on. You can join the atheist community of Austin Discord. You can join Recovering from Religion's online
did.
community, and you could even talk to Christy Powell, and you can talk to our wonderful Janice, and you can get yourself some
Yeah.
help. So thank you so much for calling in tonight.
so
Okay.
great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Nate. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks, and keep up the great work.
I appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much. Aw.
Yeah,
Canadians
right?
are so sweet.
Gives me the feels. That's so
Yeah, I'm
sweet.
feeling a little intimidated by the accents, if nothing else, guys. I'm the only person from Austin here, I guess, holding down that flag. But y'all are doing great work at Recovering from Religion, recoveringfromreligion.org. And Janice, I definitely want to talk more about the Conference on Religious Trauma. That's coming up just around the corner. What are the dates for that?
It is. The conference on religious trauma is taking place online next week. It starts on the 11th and it runs all the way through to the 16th. So from Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we are having sessions from 5 p.m. You'll have to take a look at your tickets to 7 p.m. And then on Saturday and Sunday, we're doing them all day long. So, and Dr. Daryl Ray, who, of course, is the founder of Recovering from Religion and such a wonderful
this show.
author. And yes, that's right. And this show. Daryl's one of our keynote speakers. And then we also have the incomparable Dr. Marlene Winnell, who is the original pioneer in the religious trauma movement and religious trauma syndrome. And then we actually have 21 speakers that are going to be joining us. And so some of them are coming from the angle of being therapists and being psychologists, and they will be talking about not only what is religious trauma syndrome, but presenting potential ways to treat it and work with clients. And then we also are going to be joined by people from all different backgrounds who have been walking their own journey of recovery from religious trauma and religious trauma syndrome. So we have Yasmin Mohammed, and her background is Muslim. We've got Hannah Getter, and she was raised Orthodox Jew. We have folks who have come out of Mormonism, folks who were actually part of the Unification Church, the Moonies, in the 80s. And we have cult expert Rick Allen Ross will also be joining us, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. It's just going to be an incredible time of learning about religious trauma syndrome and a time of connecting with resources.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited.
Yeah, well, tell us a little bit more about, I guess, the mission and maybe the goals of this organization, because it sounds like y'all are offering some incredible conversations and some really beautiful lectures. But what is it that Court is here to do?
Yes, the main purpose for the Conference on Religious Trauma is to educate therapists and lay people about the fact that religious trauma syndrome exists, that religion is not always good and benign, that it can be actually quite harmful. And it's time to bring this into the public sphere for people to actually start acknowledging and talking about it. And the fact that we have hundreds of people now who have signed up for this conference. I mean, that the timing is right. Also, because of what you've poor Americans endured over the past 4 years, that really served to push a lot of people out of the church, a lot of people who don't know any life outside the church. And now they're, they've been questioning their own beliefs, and they're going, well, what do I have if I don't have my faith anymore? What's my life going to look like? And they're really starting to grapple with the fact that they have experienced trauma as a result of their religious teachings and indoctrination. And so I want those people also to be able to attend. You don't have to be a therapist to attend, just to start learning about it and start understanding some of the language and start recognizing their own story as told by other people, even from other religious backgrounds and groups.
Mm-hmm.
And there are continuing education credits available for therapists who do attend.
Yeah, it feels pretty powerful. Do y'all have plans or thoughts or ideals beyond this conference? Is there? I know that there was an effort to put all of this together last year, but what is maybe the long-term mission here?
Yes, what I would like to do with Court is to be able to offer it every year. I want it to become an annual event. I'm hoping that eventually we'll actually be able to hold it in person. I was going to do it in Vancouver, British Columbia last year, except, coronavirus. But so hopefully within the next couple of years, we might be able to start doing the events in person. And I would love to be able to take them all across, not only North America, but even to different countries, because every country has people who have been touched by religious trauma. And everybody has a story to tell. So I'm already thinking towards next year and some of the topics that I would like to see addressed at the next conference. It's a really big deal. It's an idea whose time has come. The timing, I think, is really perfect. It's even better now that we're doing it this year than if we had done it in 2020, just because of everything else that's happened. And more people have had time to learn about it now. And holding it online is great because it's accessible to everybody.
Yeah, I think that that's huge, that we not only have the ability to do it online, but that we've had an entire year to practice. And like you pointed out, at least here in the States, quite frankly, get ready for it on a socio-cultural level that I think is really, really beautiful. So this is an incredibly exciting opportunity. We will go over some links and websites at the end, but just know that all of that is also in the show notes for this episode. There's plenty of opportunity, plenty of time to still get involved. And with that, Nate, I'd love to jump back on the phones if you've got somebody queued up for us.
I have got Helen waiting for us. Helen from Florida. She's got a question for you, Janice.
Okay.
All right. Helen wants to talk about strategies to help people, specifically relating to their sexuality and orientation. So, Helen, you are on with Janice, Christy, and Nate. Hello.
Howdy.
Hi there.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi. So, long-time listener, first-time caller.
Helen, you sound familiar.
Yeah. I thought I would call in for the first time. Anyway, so Janice, I'm really interested because like Nate and Christy working with recovering from religion and things like that. What advice do you have and strategies that work for you to help people embrace their sexuality, to let go of all the shame and pain of their sexuality, and learning to move into those spaces where they learn to express themselves and feel more comfortable with who they are? And the follow-up to that also as well is that, what advice would you give to us normal lay people that just have big hearts and want to help people, get, into those good spaces?
Wow. Great questions. Thank you so much. I think it's important for us to give not only each other, but also ourselves. Lots of space and time to kind of figure out where we fit in and what we are comfortable with. And just like Nate and Christy had said to a previous caller, we don't have to know this right away. We have time. We have time to figure these things out. So of course, research, educating ourselves. So not just about, the different options that are out there, but educating ourselves as far as what we were conditioned to believe when it comes to sex and sexuality. Really being willing to look at those things and pick them apart, and determining what's actually true and what is false about those things. So that takes some courage, and that sometimes can be helpful to be done with a therapist for sure. But there's a lot that people can do on their own as well. And really to embrace it as actually quite a joyful time of self exploration, because we're shaking off those chains. Those are, I talk about it in the sense of having worn a corset of Christianity, and I had it so tight, and finally one day, that was it just blew open, and suddenly there's this freedom. I have the freedom to be myself, to explore and research whatever I want on any topic. I'm not going to deny myself. If it's not hurting anyone else and it's not against the law, I'm going to explore it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say for myself, it really came down to movies. Getting an opportunity to be exposed to different orientations, different gender expressions, different types of relationships. There is so much value in reading great books. Janice already mentioned Dr. Marlene Winnell and her book, Leaving the Fold. Working with a therapist and these different things, those are all really valuable strategies. But for me, getting comfortable on like a gut level with all of these things came from listening to podcasts like this. And it came from just watching tons and tons and tons of movies about the queer experience, about sexuality, about gender. All of those things did so much to just get me not intellectually okay with, but emotionally and somatically comfortable with a lot of these things that I had been told to really despise for so many years.
I love that. That is so great. In Canada, we call that cinema therapy. And it's absolutely can be super helpful. And, also getting comfortable for some folks who have had a phobia about pornography or watching sex at all. And there are, of course, ethical porn sites that people can visit and not have any concerns that anyone was harmed or coerced in any way. So that's something for people to consider as well. And not everyone will be comfortable with it, but there is no shame in it either.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree. I think that, like what you're saying, Christy, about seeing people that are like you, on like movies and TV that you can identify with and see that they're just people, I think really helps. And, outside of getting therapy, if things are this is something you really need to work through, but just having something you can go, oh, that person is just like me, and they're a full person. It's just not about their sexuality. I think that stuff is really, really important. So thank you so much for the feedback. This is wonderful. It gives me another little thing to think about, put some little tools in my toolbox. So just want to say thank you, and I'll talk to y'all later.
Thank
Helen,
you.
thank you so much for calling in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good night.
Bye.
Oh, Helen,
You know, I did want to mention one more
Mhm.
thing just before I forget. As we were thinking about that call, has me thinking about Dr. Ray because of the books that he has written, and he actually will be talking about religion and sexuality at the conference. And I want to make sure people know that there are some discounts available. I really wanted to make the conference available to as many people as possible. So I tried to keep the ticket prices low. There are 2 options for buying tickets. And also I'm offering a discount for students. And I'm also offering some hardship discounts because I know a lot of people right now have been laid off because of the virus and the pandemic. And I don't want people turned away simply for the sake that they can't afford a ticket. And all of the sessions will be recorded. And so both ticket types, you have access to the sessions, the recorded sessions for up to 6 months after. But the top tier full access ticket is $150 US, and that gives you access to the sessions as they're going on, and you can contribute in the question and answer time as well, and you get the recordings. And then we have a ticket that's called a resources ticket, and that's half the price. That's only $75 US, and for that you get access to all of the recorded sessions.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. I'm excited, honestly. I'll definitely be checking all of those things out. And yeah, I am so excited to know not just that this information exists and that it's getting out into hands, but that it is getting into the hands of therapists, that it's getting into the hands of communicators and different people that are disseminating this information everywhere. It maybe is worth taking a moment. I know we've already thrown his name around a couple of times, but as we're sitting here on a podcast started by Dr. Daryl Ray, and I am talking to a co-host who is trained by an organization that he created to recognize the value of the books that he has written and just the contribution that he has made here is frankly intimidating to think about all of that good work. And I am just so incredibly excited to see people build on that and add to that, and any opportunity to even add a tiny portion of that here tonight as we sort of like build on that legacy is really just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, Daryl is so great.
It's been pretty humbling for a layperson like me to be able to come in and have an actual interaction with a professional healer who's done so much, not just for healing people from trauma as a therapist, but for the secular community as well. And to actually, talk to him and have him as a friend and have him as a resource and be able to reach out to him. He's incredibly involved with RFR. He will read your chats. He will monitor your calls. He is on that like a hungry kid on a Smartie, So it's really cool for someone like myself to be surrounded by professionals like him and like you, Christy, and like you, Janice. Just a simple country boy trying to keep up here.
Well, we're thankful to have you here, and I think we've got time to maybe quickly sneak in one more call if you think that there's one worth grabbing.
Yeah, I think we ought to talk to Katie. Katie, she wants to talk a little bit more about purity culture and how that makes sexual trauma worse. Katie, take it away. Tell us, what do you want to talk about today?
Hi.
Hi, Katie.
Hi.
Yeah. I guess I should possibly put a trigger warning on this question, but I guess what I'm wondering is, with purity culture emphasizing the importance of, like abstinence and sexual purity, do you think that growing up in that type of environment magnifies the trauma when enduring things like rape or sexual abuse?
Yeah, unquestionably. Janice, I'm curious about your input here, but I definitely have to say that that's going to be a huge impact for a lot of different people. What have you seen?
Oh, for sure. When you're taught that you're in the cult of hymen worship, if you're in purity culture, and taught that you're like a crumpled flower or chewed up gum or whatever horrifying picture they give to tell you what you are worth if you have had sex. Then certainly someone who's been sexually abused they've got those ideas in their head too, if that's what they've been taught. And so they may feel that they are less than, that they are not worth, they're not worth having a healthy partner. Maybe they end up with someone who abuses them because they already are feeling like, well, they're not worth much because they were abused in the first place, when that had nothing to do with them, and they bear no guilt and no shame because of what was done to them. So I think purity culture definitely also has a negative impact on folks who really, really need us to come around them and just lift them up and support them.
Yeah, and Nate, you were kind of highlighting this earlier, but oftentimes that purity culture or some of these really ridiculous beliefs about what sex is supposed to be or what marriage is supposed to be will keep people trapped in a situation where abuse becomes ongoing, because we're told that you're never supposed to leave a relationship, even if there is potentially violence or sexual violence or even just verbal abuse, or honestly, even just people that are not right for each other and are terribly hurting each other by being in proximity to one another.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it makes people that are otherwise good people turn a blind eye that otherwise, they would call the police for stuff like this, right? Like, it's not just about, my husband hits my kid. Like, we're talking about turning a blind eye to a worldwide child rape cabal. That's where this goes when it's left unchecked.
That's a fair thing to point out.
Easily the most evil thing that I can think of. So yeah, absolutely, Katie. Absolutely. It definitely makes it worse. When you discourage children or people or anyone from coming forward with this kind of stuff, that is the most evil thing I can possibly imagine. What do you think?
That's interesting. I see, especially what Helen was saying about, we worship the hymen. I'm wondering now, people who don't have a hymen, what about them? Is it, like, I guess what we teach, little girls looks different from what we teach little boys. So now I'm kind of wondering about the other side, or another side, I guess.
I mean, I can definitely say that I have been in rooms. I've been in churches and small groups and things along those lines. Some places where it was vaguely implied, and others where it was outright stated or maybe even joked about, that somebody who was put in that situation, somebody who experienced abuse or who experienced rape, was said to be less than, was said to be undesirable in these ways. And that thinking, even if the person in question, even if the survivor that we were talking about wasn't necessarily like impacted directly or wasn't necessarily directly in our lives in these ways, it sends a message. It sends a message to teenage boys that anyone who has his sex outside of God's will or whatever is somehow inferior or gross or broken. And it's a message that becomes incredibly pervasive. We talked a little bit at the top of the show about the idea of complex trauma, and to break that down a little bit, the thing that makes religious trauma so insidious in so many ways is that it is ongoing and pervasive. It is baked into our culture. And so, yeah, sometimes it's these like really terrible, devastating, big, dramatic moments, but oftentimes it is just the constant reminder that somebody is less than, that somebody is disgusting, that somebody is unacceptable. And that message, really, no matter how loving or kind or decent of a person you are, it starts to get through and it starts to sink in. And that creates a trauma, of course, for the person who is being criticized, but it also is really damaging to the minds and to the ideas of the people who are hearing that message so repetitively.
Absolutely. And reason 739 why purity culture damages people, it makes it can make parents who might otherwise have healthy sexual views nervous about talking to their children. They infantilize parts of the anatomy, right? They won't say penis, they won't say vagina, let's say wee, and use these infantilizing terms that ingrains in children that that's something to be ashamed of, so that if they do suffer sexual trauma or abuse, there's some sort of it's already pushed down, right? Like there's already an innate shame that makes them even less likely to report it. So if I had one piece of advice for parents as to how to inoculate your children against sexual abuse, it would be, don't use those infantilizing words. Teach them the actual words for their anatomy, and teach them to be comfortable talking to you about it and asking you about it.
And certainly teach them about consent, so that they know that nobody is allowed to touch them without their permission. Yeah, we have got to be very open and frank with our children. We can't shrink away because we're embarrassed. We have to really treat this like a life and death issue, just like you would teach them, they have to stay away from poison, like the skull and crossbones on this thing that's under the sink or whatever. You want to be teaching them that there are predators out there. There are people who would try and groom them and take advantage of them. And so just be frank with them about it.
Thank you for catching that pass, Janice.
Thank you so much for all that.
Thank you.
I think this validates my suspicions. So thank you.
Well, thank you for calling in, Katie.
Calling.
Wow, we've had some pretty great callers today, I have to say.
We sure have.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, it shows up every time we talk to somebody from recovering from religion, or when we get into the idea of religious trauma. I mean, obviously there is an incredible need here, and I'm excited about the direction the ACA is heading in making sure that we get more of that kind of information out, because this is something that resonates with, I think, everybody in our community on some level.
Absolutely. There's very few of us that started atheist, and never had atheist parents or an atheist family, or has not had any, has not been influenced by religious thought in some way, whether or not they bought into it. The born and bred atheist is a pretty rare breed. I'd like it if it wasn't, but I think a lot of us can resonate with Janice's story. I myself can quite a bit. So it's important that we get these stories out there.
Well, and even still, it's in the air that we breathe. It's in the water that we're drinking. These religious ideals, I mean, as I pointed out, it's on our goddamn money, and we make our kids put their hands over their heart and talk about it at school every day here in America. So good goddamn, there's a lot of work to be done here. So with that in mind, Janice, how do folks sign up for this? How can people get access to the conference and everything else that we've been talking about tonight?
Sure. We are going to have a link in the show notes and the information. Oh, look at that. Yes, that was me before and after.
Oh, goodness.
And it's got the, you can see the website there, thefeedloop.com. You can also Google Conference on Religious Trauma, and then the option that comes up that says Feed Loop, that's the one you would click on. So you go there and you can register right there on the site. And anyone who's watching or listening to this podcast, you can get yourself a nice little discount using the code POD15, capital letters, POD15. Get yourself a little discount right there.
I really thought that was a reference to alt-rock group POD, but okay, we'll go with POD
What happened to Christy?
Christy pulled his mic out again. He tends to do that from time to time. So he's going to get himself plugged in, and I'll let
The
him
producers
continue
are
in
like,
his interview. Christy, you made it through it almost a whole show, buddy.
Oh, we still can't hear you.
No,
the Canadians are
no,
taking over. The
We still
Canadians
got
are
nothing.
running
All
the
right,
show.
well, let's just carry on,
Take off, eh?
Christy will be back shortly, I'm sure.
I hope so. He says no.
He says no. So what can the audience do, Janice? Like what can the rest of us, what can a layperson like me do to support the mission of the Conference on Religious Trauma?
I think for sure, listen to someone. When someone tells you that they no longer believe, that they've lost their faith, meet them with compassion. Don't say things like, well, you finally woke up and you don't believe in Santa Claus, or took you long enough, or whatever, because these people are walking through a significant transition. They have already experienced trauma. So please be a soft place for them to land. And we want to encourage them to attend podcasts like this one. And there are lots of places also on Facebook. There are different groups for people who are recovering, of course, recovering from religion. Journeyfree.org is Marlene Winnell's organization as well. There are places that people can go for help and healing along the way, and encourage them to come to the Conference on Religious Trauma. And one more thing I'll say too, I have a podcast all about secular parenting. It's called The Godless Moms Podcast, and I host it with my friend Courtney Hurd, who's known as the Godless Mom on social media, and we do it every Saturday at noon PST.
Godless Moms Podcast.
Yeah,
okay.
That's us. We're number 9 in Costa Rica. I don't know what people in Costa Rica are. So I'm like, field trip. We do not want to disappoint our Costa Rican audience.
If I could be any number in Costa Rica, I would be satisfied with that, right?
Exciting.
I would take a Costa Rican winter over a Canadian winter all day.
Seriously. Christy, we still don't hear you.
Christy, I don't think Christy is back yet. Yeah, I'm not hearing him. That's okay. Christy, if you could give us some pantomime, or perhaps we should play a game of charades real quick before we wrap up. All right. It's going to be 2 words, 1 syllable.
Sounds like, yep.
Yeah, that's right. So Janice, what are some final words that you want to leave our audience with tonight? If you could wrap up religious trauma syndrome in a few words, what do you want to leave people with?
I definitely want people to know that they are not alone, and they do not need to feel any shame. Reach out to a secular therapist, seculartherapy.org, great place to start recovering from religion. Also a great place to start by phoning in if you just need to talk to someone in real time. Read Marlene Winnell's book called Leaving the Fold. It's tremendously helpful for people who are coming out of fundamentalist religions. And do yourself a favor and attend the Conference on Religious Trauma. You'll learn about religious trauma, and I think actually have a pretty good time too at the conference.
Well, if they're as entertaining as you, I'm sure they will have an absolute blast.
Thank you.
All right. So if we could get Janice's links up one more time for the Conference on Religious Trauma. Get that up there so folks can have just one more look. When is that again, Janice?
It's starting next week. It's the 11th through the 16th online.
Okay, great. And the book again was Leaving the Fold.
Leaving the Fold by Dr. Marlene Winnell. I cannot recommend that book highly enough. It's a wonderful book.
Yeah, I was doing some research into some talks that you've given and some talks that Dr. Daryl Ray has given just leading up to this episode, so I wouldn't make a complete fool of myself. And that name that name kept coming up, so I may have to add that to my reading list.
Oh, yes.
But next, if you want more of the Atheist Community of Austin podcasts, we could get that up there. We are on tiny.cc/AEN podcasts, and there is every single show that the ACA does. You've got your Talk Heathen, you've got your Truth Wanted, you've got your secular sexuality, and of course, you've got the Atheist Experience. So again, that's tiny.cc/AEN podcasts. Also, if you're looking for some great chat, perhaps some peer support, someone to talk to in a safe space, our Facebook group, the Secular Sexuality fan group, is a great place to start. It's just run by fans, run for fans, but all of us are in there. So if you're looking for someone to talk to, a safe space, got some questions, come on in there. Nobody's gonna judge you. We got good answers and free virtual pride flags for every new member. Come on in.
It's a great time.
We can hear you.
Hey,
Christy, your
It's a
part's already
miracle.
done though.
right? Yeah, no, I'm done for the evening. I just want to mention that everything that we've been talking about, again, will be in the footnotes for this episode. So if you missed the name of a book or a link or a website, we've got you covered. Wherever you're hearing this, just check the bottom of the screen after we're done here tonight, and it'll all be there for you.
Absolutely. And speaking of community, we are going to be on our Discord, the tiny.ce/ACA Discord. We're going to have a bit of an after show after this show wraps. So if you want to join us there, that would be great. Janice and I think Christy will be there.
Yeah, absolutely. If
drop
you're
his
checking this
microphone
out
again,
live,
or-
we'd love to hear from you. We'll be there.
All right. And we also have merchandise. Secular Sexuality has merch. We got your t-shirts. We got your cups. We got your posters. Step right up here at bit.ly/AEN merch. So check it out.
Check out the t-shirts. They're great.
They are great. I haven't got one yet, but Greg promises me that there's one in the mail. I don't know, but we'll see. And finally, if we could get our crew cam, we have got, I was going to say 10, but we have got the most tantalizing, titillated, talented, but certainly not tertiary crew members that make this all happen. Thank you guys so much for what you do behind the scenes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, you definitely scripted that out. You get the official attached to your name and you show up ready to play.
Well, I was thinking earlier about T-words, like good T-words that I could get some good alliteration. And then tertiary came up and I'm like, that'd be kind of rude if you said they were tertiary. So I'm like, not tertiary. We'll get that in at the end. How'd that go? What do you think, Janice?
I thought you did a great job. You're doing Canada proud.
Oh,
Awesome.
okay. Yeah, so maybe we'll have him back. And, typically at the top of the show, we have a different introduction, but at the, I'm not even going to try with any more T-words. At the bottom of the hour, we definitely want to thank everybody for being here. Of course, our crew and everybody who put it on. Janice, thank you so much for taking the time right before this huge endeavor and all of the work that you've put into it to join us tonight. And, with all of that stress, with all of that excitement, with all of the healing and the growing and everything else that everybody's doing tonight, probably a good idea to maybe take a couple of seconds for yourself and give yourself a big ol' orgasm. Or
Believe me, that's on tonight's program.
it's on the agenda.
It is already.
Yeah, well, if you're lucky, if you're able, maybe better yet, give somebody else
Somebody
one.
else one.